The Hong Kong Massacre was developed and published by Vresky and was released on the PlayStation 4 and PC in 2019. It is a fast-paced top-down shooter game in the same vein as the Hotline Miami games, and is focused on forcing the player to play perfectly and utilize fast reflexes in order to progress. The story of the Hong Kong Massacre is pretty simple. It involves the main character talking to a few people here and there in between certain stages, and revealing more and more of the plot as the game goes on. The game takes place over the span of 35 stages, with boss fights being peppered in here and there throughout. The stages are very short, with most of them clocking in at just around a minute if the player is precise and fast. This may not sound like a game that would take long to beat, but there is a catch. Being shot one time is all it takes for the level to be completely restarted. To me, this wasn't ever really frustrating, because for one, I played the absolute hell out of Hotline Miami, which had the same structure, and also each of my deaths were my own damn fault. The main character has some tricks up his sleeve though in order to keep him alive through all the looming chaos surrounding his journey. He can dodge and slide around, and while doing so he is unable to take damage. This has a slight cooldown in between uses, so it can't just be spammed, but this is the best way to not get shot into oblivion. There's also a slow-mo mode a la Max Payne that can be used, but I didn't use this at all because I wanted the extra challenge. Trust me, beating a stage feels incredibly satisfying, and absolutely steamrolling through the bad guys is a ton of fun. The controls are simple and for the most part feel really good. The only part of the controls that I had an issue with at first was aiming. After a while though, this really wasn't a problem. The main character can shoot, dodge, pick up weapons from dead foes, and use slow-mo. There isn't really anything else to worry about, so it makes the game easy to just jump into. Enemies are color-coded, usually based on what weapons they are carrying, so it can make them easy to identify, and I really dig this addition. It reminds me a lot of how the game Mr. Shifty did this. Enemies also have access to all the weapons that you do: pistols, shotguns, submachine guns, and automatic rifles. You are given the choice to start with any of these weapons at the beginning of each stage, and you can change which one you spawn with anytime you die if you want to take a different approach. Also, each enemy that is killed drops their weapon, and the player can pick it up. This will be important most of the time because ammo counts are fair, but they're not super high, so this needs to be in the back of the player's mind at all times. There's almost nothing worse than running into a room and having your gun click instead of going boom. Enemies can do the same fancy rolls and slides that your character can, and they are invulnerable during this just like you are. So this can add tension to the fights because you just never know when they're going to do it. Personally, I like this feature. It kept things exciting and challenging. The stages in the game are usually taking place inside buildings that have a lot of rooms, rooftops, warehouses, or even out in the street. Some stages are simply just a boss fight, and those are very quick most of the time. Oddly enough, I found some of the later bosses to be easier than some of the early ones, which I wasn't really expecting. Stages are filled with windows and thin areas that can be shot through, so this can be both a good and bad thing for the player. On one hand, it makes it easy to kill enemies by shooting through these, but at the same time the player can just as easily be shot through them too. Shooting doors can pop them open and can lead to some really great ways to get the drop on baddies behind them, but sometimes this doesn't really work out the way that you want it to. Each stage has challenges that can be completed, like beating it under a certain time threshold, not missing a single shot, or not using slow-mo, and these all net the player star points. These can be used to make upgrades to each different type of the starting weapons available. These include higher capacity ammo magazines, in some cases including unlimited ammo, a higher firing rate, and even movement speed while holding the weapon. The player can go back to any level and try to complete more and more of these and obtain more upgrades as they progress, and I highly recommend doing this. Most of the stages are so quick that once you get the hang of the game, blasting through with no slow-mo and a clear time are fun to do. Not missing a shot, however, is not something I wanted to do. That just seems like an exercise in insanity. The graphics are pretty good, with a lot of little details like paper and debris flying everywhere during firefights, as well as a lot of particle effects and smoke from gunfire. This really adds to the chaos of the carnage that ensues with each gunfight. Wood will splinter from being shot or dove through, glass will shatter, and blood will coat the floors and walls with each new victim. The game seemed to work fine with an uncapped frame rate, but using VSync did not seem to go well with my system. It made the game feel extremely sluggish and run terribly. Even when unlocked though, the frames would occasionally dip, but it didn't really bother me. I usually kept a frame rate of 120 throughout. so the action felt smooth and it looked how it felt. The sounds were really good and I enjoyed hearing all the gunshots and breaking glass. But the place where this part of the design really shines is the soundtrack. The music is really great in this game. The grooves filled with piano, bass, synth, and drums are really catchy, and this is a great thing because when you get stuck on a really tough spot, having to hear the same music over and over needs to be a good thing. So, would I recommend the Hong Kong Massacre? Yes, I would. The gameplay is simple and doesn't really change from stage to stage, but the challenge of different stage layouts and approaches that can be taken with each one are a lot of fun if you're looking to scratch a simple action game itch. Those that like Hotline Miami and Mr. Shifty should feel right at home here, even though the stages are much shorter in this title. So if you don't mind the straightforward gameplay loop, then I believe you'll have a good time with the hours this game provides.